Are you an executive director who has a board or a board member who drives you nuts? Are you on the board and maybe you have some issues on the board that you need to deal with, or an executive director that you need to deal with? Then you are in luck because today we are talking about board governance and specifically how to have brave board conversations. Because let's face it, having boards and staff and trying to sort all of this out sometimes doesn't go as smoothly as we would like. Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast that helps women leaders in nonprofits get out of survival mode and thrive in both leadership and life. I'm your host, leadership development coach Kathy Archer, and I help women leaders enjoy impactful leadership. Today on the podcast, I'm talking to Heather Terrence from Pinpoint Governance Group. Heather is a certified association executive, a nonprofit governance expert, and president of Pinpoint Governance Group. She's got over 20 years of experience working in the nonprofit sector, most recently as an executive director for a national trade association. In this episode, you're really going to hear Heather pull from all of that experience and all of that education and all of the work she does with organizations. She's got a ton of wisdom and insights and little tricks to help you develop your board, develop your governance policies on your board, to help the board work more cohesively with the staff, the executive director, and vice versa. Let's transition now into my conversation with Heather Terrence around brave board conversations. Welcome to the podcast, Heather. I am super excited to have you talk about brave board conversations today, because I know that board conversations and boards in general can kind of be a little bit of a tense topic for some people. So before we dive into that, just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got to teaching people about how to have those brave board conversations.
For sure. Thanks for having me today, Kathy. I really appreciate the opportunity. So I landed in the nonprofit sector kind of by accident. I moved from Montreal to Toronto early in my career, and I landed a job as kind of a, entry-level reception admin assistant role with a nonprofit, and didn't look back after that. So I've basically worked through every position there is within a nonprofit. Like I said, from reception right up until becoming an executive director, which was my last role. So what my experience has really allowed me to understand every single role within an organization. So once I became an executive director, I took some time off after I left to work on an MBA that I was enrolled in. And on the side, I had a governance consultant who was a colleague of mine who I hired actually about 13 years ago, who gave me a few projects to help her. So I worked on some scripts for an online governance kind of university for a client. I did some other policy writing as well, and I just loved it. So I decided to kind of hang up my executive hat in the nonprofit sector and to open a governance consulting firm, which I did about 2 years ago, and have not looked back since. I love it, and I love helping nonprofits and nonprofit leaders to really understand governance, to understand how everything works together, and to make them better leaders, which in turn makes the organization stronger.
So half the audience is going, oh my God, you love policy writing. And the other half are going, really? There are other people who love policy writing like me? Because not everybody does. And it's not all of what goes on in boards and governance, but it's a portion that, again, some people either love or hate. And so I love that there's supports out there for people to do this kind of work. So before we dive into that, let's talk about what is this kind of work, because not everybody understands governance, what it means, what it looks like. So help everybody understand how you determine governance or define governance.
Yeah, so I found what I think is the best definition of governance, and I'll read it. I haven't memorized it yet, but I will read it. Governance refers to the processes and structures used to direct and manage an organization's operations and activities. It defines the division of power and establishes mechanisms to achieve accountability among stakeholders, the board, and management. So the way I interpret that is it's almost like cogs in a machine. And there's all these different processes, structures, and policies and bylaws that make up this machine. So it really does, you have to understand you don't have to be an expert in all of those little pieces, but you have to understand, number one, what is the cog? And secondly, who's responsible for it? So I think that's really understanding the roles and responsibilities is probably one of the biggest things that organizations are challenged with, which leads to, something we'll talk about, which is the policies, because that's the little secret sauce that will allow an executive director or even the board member to kind of, reference that information that they'll need in order to find out where they need to go or what they need to do.
So when we were preparing for this podcast, Heather, I said, some people talk about a governance board and an operating board. And you said, no, I don't distinguish those. So tell us why you don't distinguish those.
I think a lot of boards get hung up on what their title is in terms of where they're how they're functioning. There was I'm sure you're familiar with the Carver model, which used to be very popular, still kind of is a little bit, but is becoming a little bit outdated now. So a lot of them like to call themselves Carver-based, they follow a Carver-based governance model, or a strategic, they call themselves a strategic board. A lot of organizations that don't have any staff will be an operational board because they have to roll up their sleeves and do all the work, not only that staff would do, but as a volunteer, as a board member, those responsibilities. Jack of all trades. Jack of all trades, exactly. So I kind of encourage them not to don't worry about the label, worry about the cogs. Because that's really where, if you understand how all that works, don't worry about the label, because it'll all kind of flesh itself out. The other thing too is typically organizations, when they start off as an operational board. So it's that roll up your sleeves, all hands on deck, jack of all trades. And then once they get established, they start getting more revenue. They are able to hire staff. They'll transition to kind of a hybrid model. And then eventually, once they have staff to do the work so that the board can really focus on strategy, they'll call themselves a strategic board.
And one of the things that I've noticed is maybe they've transitioned, but they're still operating in the old model, or there's older board members who are still hanging on to some of those old things. What are some of the other big problems that you've noticed between boards and the operation sides of things?
Yeah, I think getting into what you just talked about, I think that there's an expression actually in the governance world where it says it's okay to have your nose in it, but not your fingers. So I think it doesn't matter whether you're operational, whether you're strategic or a hybrid. I think the key component there, or the key thing to understand and to focus on, is those roles and responsibilities. So as a strategic board, you wouldn't have a board member picking out the paint color, for the office.
Oh, but some of them want to.
But some of them want to. But if you, again, and we'll get into it a little bit later, if you have that defined in policy, it's easy to point to it to say, this is not your responsibility. This is the executive director's responsibility. So it's easier to have those conversations and to point them actually to the documents that they've signed off on to hold them accountable for what their role actually is.
So one of the things when we were preparing for this interview, Heather, we talked about was the fact that a lot of conversations might happen, but few of them are brave. And what often happens is there's a lot of tension under the surface, or there's a lot of confusion and then conflict, or things sort of fester for years. I coach some leaders who are really sort of deep into it with their board, and those issues have been there for years, and they keep resurfacing, new topic, new dilemma, but same issue keeps resurfacing because they've never had the courage to address it. Either the executive director or the board, they've never kind of dove in. You experience the same thing?
For sure. There is some organizations that still struggle with that, for sure. But again, I think there's a few ways that you can approach that. One is, like I said, organizations may not have any of those policies. So they may not have a policy that outlines what is the difference between the role of a board member and versus the executive director or staff. So the first thing you need to do is to really look at your organization's governance documents and say, is that clearly laid out? Yeah. If it is clearly laid out, you can have those conversations safely because it's part of your governance. It's part of your governing documents that your board members should have signed off on in order to join the board. They should have read those policies and agreed to abide by them. So that's a way of having those conversations. The second is a lot of board members won't have those conversations because they just don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
It's the same as if you have a staff member, who's been there a long time. They're very passionate about the organization. It's hard to have those conversations to say, things have changed, the role has changed, or you've outgrown this, situation or this role. So, those are tough conversations. Getting divorced, that's a difficult conversation as well. So it's just part of life. It's part of those discussions that need to happen. But some organizations look to kind of avoiding and sidetracking those conversations by doing board self-assessments. So it's having other board members provide, it's like a 360 feedback process where you can have other board members evaluate directors on the board so that collectively you can say, look, it's not, this is a situation that we need to handle. So typically those results are delivered by the chair. It's important to deliver them professionally and, being respectful of the individual. But I think that, that's a way of kind of skirting around how I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have the brave conversation, but that's another way of kind of having those tough conversations. The third thing is doing an audit. So having someone like me or a consultant come in and do an audit of your board, what's working, what's not, and have a third party come in and really give, observe a board meeting and have those conversations, from a person who has the expertise and also can provide that outside view as to how the board is functioning.
So much there. We're going to cover the 3 strategies we have for having these brave board conversations as as either the leader of the board or the executive director. But I think a couple things I want to touch on. One is the work that I often do I have a membership site inside of my training library, is I often say, you know what to do. There's a reason you don't do it. And so that's part of the challenge here is I know I should have that conversation, but I don't know how. I don't, and I'm uncomfortable. One of the webinars I did was on having those tough conversations, because it's not that you don't know that it's necessary. It's that, oh, I'm busy, or it just didn't feel right. And then 3 years later, you're still putting it off. And again, sometimes we just need to have those conversations. So I think that's critically important. And I think the other thing you touched on is that's not always easy in a board that is entrenched with a lot that's going on. And so I love the idea of having an outside consultant come in. I'm going to bring another guest on the podcast down the road that does conflict resolution sort of scans or whatever they are. Just, I think sometimes we don't see what we don't want to see. And so having somebody else come in and just really, just sit at a board meeting and you'll see stuff that they have overlooked. It doesn't take much to go, wow, this is kind of what's going on here. So I think that's really important. So let's dive into the 3 strategies though, for really having the brave board conversations. And you've talked about number 1, but let's really nail it home. It really is about having policies. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so I think that the biggest one is, like I said a few times, is the policy that outlines the difference between what are the responsibilities of the board versus what are the responsibilities of staff, because that's where things get sticky. So if you have a policy that outlines as specifically as you possibly can, providing examples or procedures as well.
How is this different than a job description? because you said policies are important. I think it is important. Well, we know it's important that we have policies. When I was talking to Mary Beth Finley a few podcasts back, she works in an organization, and when the pandemic hit, she said we went and grabbed the pandemic policy, out of the binder. We were ready to roll. Had they not had that, there would have been pandemonium, like there was in many other nonprofit organizations.
For
So
sure.
that there's policies around, this is what you do during a pandemic. This is how we handle other stuff. What you're talking about is policy around roles. And so, I think sometimes we forget, well, we don't have job descriptions, or our job descriptions are ancient, or they might be changing ever so slightly. And I think the other thing to touch on, and this is probably what you're alluding to, is there's an overlap of stuff too. And that's okay, because maybe the board doesn't see the job descriptions.
Yeah, so the job descriptions are, you obviously need role descriptions or job descriptions, whatever you want to call it, for the board and for the executive director. And that's, if that has the information that you need to outline, exactly what lane you're in when you're a board member and what lane you're in as an executive director, that's fine. So touching on that pandemic policy, so that is something that as an organization, you'd probably have. But the policies that I'm talking about are more in the areas of board governance. So having a policy on confidentiality, having a policy on conflicts of interest, having a policy on, or a code of conduct for your board members. So those types of things are having terms of references for your committees. So those documents are guiding documents, and they also, the situations that you get in as a board, many situations are related to confidentiality. A lot of them are related to conflict of interest. So if you have those policies in place, again, it's so easy to just reference that and say you're offside here. And a good practice is to have the board, like I said, when they come on board, they're going to sign off, having that they've read and they understand, and they will abide by these policies. And then a really good practice is to kind of have them re-sign and re-acknowledge every year, so that it's fresh in their minds. They get a refresher on exactly what their responsibilities are and what they can and cannot do. And then have them physically or digitally, I guess now, sign off on adhering to them annually.
So what I was going to add was Jean Eaton was on the podcast a while back, and she is she does work around privacy in the healthcare profession. And one of the things she was talking to me about once was, I sit on boards, and, the emails from the board come into my email. And she's like, okay, so what if they're going to so-and-so's work email, and then they leave that organization? Who has access to that work email? So if you've got a sensitive issue, either maybe a death of a client, or, there's an issue around staffing, and that's in this person's work email that who knows has access to that email, that's a big confidentiality issue. And if those kinds of, I think when we think of confidentiality, we think of, where do you store the files in the organization or the program? Yes, that's an important piece. But as a board, there's also confidential things that we need to look at.
For sure. And it's around what's discussed at board meetings. It's the materials that you get. There could be, you might be merging with another nonprofit, and that's super confidential information that you don't want, released until you're ready to do so. So it's not just about documents and maintaining, storing documents safely and making sure that they're protected. It's more so on the actual board. What happens in the boardroom stays in the boardroom, unless the board agrees that, they might agree on some talking points that they can bring outside of the boardroom to explain what happened, or if they made a major decision, to have kind of key messaging around that. But really, the policy on confidentiality should really outline, what they are, what kind of information they need to protect and maintain confidentiality with.
So whose job is it to write the policies? The executive director, the board chair?
It depends on what's in the policy. It'll say who's responsible for it, and it also depends on what type of board you have, an organization you have. So if you have that roll up your sleeves Operational board, you have no staff to do it, so it's going to be the board. Typically, for a strategic board, it's typically staff who would take the lead on drafting, and then it would be presented to probably a governance committee who would be responsible for making sure that all of the policies are in place. They're updated as required. Usually, there's a schedule, so every year you review maybe a third of your policies, just to make sure that they're up to date. So it really depends on the organization and if it has the staff power to take the lead on that.
And is that something you do with the people that you work with, is help them write the policies?
Yes. So I either help them to write them from scratch, or I draft them from scratch for them, or I look at what they have and I tweak it based on what I think is missing or what's in there that should be removed. I look at leading practices. I look at like organizations. So if you're in healthcare, for example, I'd look at other organizations that are similar to that organization to see what they're doing. And then I would recommend whatever edits I have.
And those ones that you can download off the internet, the templated versions, stay away from, or?
I wouldn't say stay away from, but with governance, I find that there is no silver bullet. So there is no one size fits all. So what works for one organization may not work for another one. So you might look at a template and say, this is perfect. I just need to change the names. I need to add in these two things and we're done. Or you might, look at 6 different ones and say, I like this piece, I like this piece, I like this piece, and let's put it all together into the right fit for this specific for my specific organization.
Right.
Because like I said, they're all different. They all have different mandates. They all have different cultures, environments. So, it's rare that you'll find that silver bullet where you'll see the one template and go, perfect, just change the names. So you have to really, most organizations would have to dig a little and do more work to really find bits and pieces that they could put together to make it their own.
Okay. All right. So the first strategy for having brave board conversations is to actually have some policies in place. And the second strategy is?
I think that it's your job as an executive director. I think that it's, you talked about, oh, well, it's hard to have those conversations. Life is hard in general. It's hard to say, I'm going to lose weight now. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to, those are things that all are tough to do. The difference is that you're getting paid to do this job. So while I could, decide to quit smoking or start running every day, that's me in my personal life. And I'm the only one who has skin in that game. But if you're an executive director, it's a very different scenario. Yeah. It's not only important because you're getting paid to do your job, which is to have those conversations, whether it's with the board or if you have a staff person, we talked about before, who is underperforming or who, you need to have a tough conversation with because an issue has come up that you need to deal with because it's interfering. When it starts interfering, especially with your operations or with the functionality of the board and the ability for the board to do its work and do its work effectively, that's when you really have to have those conversations. So it's not just at a governance level, but also operationally with your own staff.
Yeah. And one of the things that I know we're looking for in our leaders is that they are ethical, that they're honest, that they lead with integrity, but also that they're decisive. And I think sometimes we put things off because we don't want to have that tough conversation. We are lacking the courage and we avoid it. And then people question, like, oh my God, we've been waiting for months for her to make this decision, or, he's dragging his feet on this. Well, actually, the issue is not that they don't want to make the decision. They don't want to have the tough conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it is your job. First one, have your policies in place. Second one, it's your job. So there are resources to help you do that job. Heather's here to help you if you just kind of need to figure out how to do that. I'm here to help you if you really aren't comfortable having those conversations and need to work around. A couple of things that I talk about. One is the confidence. So I think, what I hear often with people is I'm not good with conflict. I don't like those tough conversations. And the truth is, you're not going to get better at them until you practice having them, and you're going to suck at them for a while. So the longer you avoid them, the longer it's going to take to get good at them. And so we work around competence before we can be confident. So you got to build the skills around that. And then the second thing that I touch on a lot with people is the thing around composure, because people are afraid if they go into those tough conversations, they're going to fall apart. They're going to lose it. They're going to get defensive. They're going to cry. They're going to shut down. And so being able to manage those emotions, it's okay to be angry in those conversations. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to be annoyed, but it's how you manage those emotions that really make the difference around how that conversation is going to end up. And that takes some work. And that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients.
Yeah, I think the practice thing is that you touched on is really important. Because I know with anything in life, that cliche expression, practice makes perfect, even though it doesn't.
Practice makes progress. That's what I've learned. Yes.
And I find another strategy to use is to really surround yourself with people who are like-minded and who have similar. When we talked before about finding your tribe, finding your team. Really surrounding yourself with people who are going to be positive with you and helpful to have those conversations, particularly if they have the same type of job as you. So if you're building a network of other executive directors who have the same challenges, different, maybe bigger challenges here, smaller there, but generally they're all, boards are in general difficult to manage.
Yes.
Like we can all agree that there's an element of truth to that.
Yeah.
So really surrounding yourself with individuals who can encourage you, just like a support group where you can say, here's the situation I'm having with a director, give them the background and then say, have you ever dealt with this? How did you deal with it? What advice would you give to me? Can I practice talking to you, pretending that I'm that person? Because they know what you're going through. They have the same kind of job. They work in the same type of organization. That's a great way of building a network who can support you when these times come that you have to be brave and have to have those tough conversations.
Years ago, I met once a month for breakfast with a group of other leaders. And we were talking about programming and all that kind of stuff, but it was after the official conversation that we had some of our best conversations, and some of those ladies, because they were all ladies at the time, mentored me and supported me, and we built off each other. And I can think over the years, the relationships that I had helped me move through that. What we're struggling with now is again, as I said, you would go to a conference and you would sit in the session, and then you and this other person might go for drinks after, or you might have that conversation as you're walking down the hall. That's not happening as much. And so a couple things that I would suggest to people is you can still create those, like reach out. Heather and I reached out and we're like just chit-chatting and talking, and you experienced this, I experienced this. So I think you have to actively reach out. I have one client who builds book clubs with other leaders. So it's around a topic, but then again, once they finish the Zoom conversation about that part of the book, then they can transition into some of those other conversations. So you might have to think creatively now about how to build those networks. It's not like you're just going to pick up the phone and say, hey, my board member's pissing me off today. You want to have a little bit of a relationship first.
Yeah, exactly. And there are associations that you can join to really, have those networks kind of handed to you by just joining.
Yes.
A lot of organizations, especially when it's virtual now, that kind of has kicked open the door for even more collaboration. I was just on a call this morning where we were planning an event for a Toronto kind of area, GTA-based event. And then we thought, we can have someone from anywhere participate on our panel. We can have someone in, Alberta or in the UK or wherever. So I think that our current environment has actually allowed us to be, even though we're kind of stuck and we're alone, it's allowing us to reach out even broader than what, was available before, like in person. So there's so many support networks out there, especially now. And like I said, with the associations, they're really doing, from what I've seen, they're really doing a very, very good job at making sure that people are getting the support that they need.
Tell us about the, and I'll get the name wrong, the executive directors.
The Canadian Society of Association Executives. So I've been a member since about 2003. I received my certified association executive credential with them. And they basically are comprised of two sets of memberships. We have executive members who are leaders within nonprofits, primarily associations across Canada. And then we have business members, someone like me, who was, it's kind of weird because I was an executive member for so long. And then when I started my company, I'm now a business member, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have a lot of opportunities for support. They have an online online community where you can post, questions or, challenges that you're having, and people are very quick to kind of support and to provide templates and resources and advice with their own experiences. So it's CSAE is the acronym, and they're a great association for nonprofit.
And we'll make sure that we put the link in the notes so that people can find that as well. Yep. Okay, so in summary, the 3 strategies to help you have those brave board conversations are: first, to make sure that you have your policies done and complete. Second is to really make sure that you are doing your job as an executive director. It is your job to have those tough conversations. And then third one is, remember, even though it is your job, it's not really that you have to do it alone. There can be people behind you to support you in a variety of ways. Build that network of support, reach out and get consultants and supports to help you, and really make sure that you are doing the work, but feel supported in the process. Anything you want to add to that?
I would just say those 2 other kind of, I won't call them cheats, but they're workarounds, which is doing the board assessments, which is kind of like that 360 review to get those that feedback that's needed to have the conversation, and also doing an audit as well, to have a third party come in and really look at your board. It could be just the way it functions. You could dive even deeper into the policy area. And have someone with a fresh lens come and look at, how the board's functioning, and to provide feedback for improvement.
And so just on that note, I do an assessment that would give some of that information, but I'm pretty sure you do as well. Is that right, Heather?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So please reach out if you are looking for something to help you, because again, don't feel like you have to do this all alone. I think that's one of the things I notice most with leaders. And again, my focus is on women leaders, but is that they feel isolated and alone. And like, they think they have to do it all. And we're like, no, there's supports out there.
And it is a very isolating job. Being an executive director or CEO of a nonprofit is a very, very challenging position. Because you're the chief staff person, so you can't really talk to your staff about staff. You can't talk to your staff about the board, and that's why that network is so important, because it is a really, really, and not to mention that the crunch of the crushing workload of being stretched financially and staff wise. So there's so many demands on these individuals that having that network to lean on is super, super important.
So well said. Anything we've missed that you want to add, Heather?
I think we've covered everything.
All right. So tell people where they can find you.
They can find me on LinkedIn. I think I am the only Heather Terrence on LinkedIn.
And I will put the link in the notes.
Yes. And my website is pinpointgg.ca. If you go to it, you can subscribe to receive my monthly newsletter. And by subscribing, you also get a free governance audit checklist, which will be emailed to you, so you can see how you fare in the realm of governance.
That is awesome. So that would be very handy for people. So again, those links will all be in the notes for you. So thank you very much, Heather, for jumping in with your wisdom today and sharing your insights and some really good tips, I think, that are practical. They're not, it's not easy to have those conversations, but there are some workarounds that can make it easier, that will help people hop over the bump. And that's when, when women do this and leaders do this and they do this work, because you said earlier, the whole world of the ED and the CEO is stressful. And I find that a lot of people spend their time in survival mode, and that sucks the life out of them, sucks the life out of their organization. But when you can do some of this work to get out of that, you move to thriving in both your leadership and life. If you found today's episode helpful, then you are going to love the training library. Many women leaders in nonprofits wish that they had a coach or a mentor to help them, but they don't believe that they or their organization can afford it. Oh, but you can. Inside of the Training Library membership site, you will not only get access to affordable and easily accessible ongoing personal and professional development training, you will also have access to a leadership coach at your fingertips. That way, when you hit those inevitable challenges that leadership will bring your way, you'll have both the resources and the support to navigate your way through them with confidence, composure, and while keeping your integrity intact. To find out more, head to kathyarcher.com/library. If you are enjoying the show, I'd love it if you could leave me a comment or a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Go make the rest of your day awesome.